January 6th will be part of the legacy of many who were in Washington at the time, including Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. That day ripped a seam in the senator's relationship with then-President Trump, though it was already in pretty bad shape. A broken relationship that brings us here, with McConnell announcing he will step down as the Senate's top GOP leader in November, after holding the post longer than anyone in congressional history. Paul Kane joins me now. He's a senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Post. Paul, it is great to have you with me. Let me ask you a quick question about that Trump point, which is in Senator McConnell's remarks. He said, you know, it's not a failure of his that he can't read the political room. Was he suggesting essentially that it's Trump's party and he has no future in it?
That would go a little further than what he would acknowledge. He was acknowledging something that he said to me in an interview a week and a half ago and to others recently, that he understands that his party, a majority of his party now, has changed on some of the traditional views that he grew up with. You know, he's a guy who won his first Senate race in 1984 with the coattails of Ronald Reagan, and he has sort of kept those views front and center now for, you know, nearly 40 years. But he knows that that is just not where the heart and soul of Republican voters are anymore. And increasingly, every 2 years, more and more people come into his caucus who don't have those same views. And they have been driving him kind of nuts. And so I think he found this as the time, having just won a very, very painful battle over trying to get the Senate to pass aid for Ukraine, $60 billion out of a $95 billion total package. I think he saw this as a moment that he should make this announcement, that he still looked like he had some power and some juice, but yes, things have changed.
And Paul, explain that change, not just in positions on various issues, but also in the way the place works. If you read The Long Game, his book, in it he talks about, glowingly pretty much, about Senator Joe Biden and Vice President Joe Biden and how they could work together. Explain how that Senate is different from the one he is in right now.
He came up in a Senate in the 80s as this young kid where there were people like Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch, a liberal from Massachusetts, a conservative from Utah, who could sit atop the Senate Health and Education Committee, and they worked together on a lot of legislation. And so McConnell, when he became leader, he was a furious partisan. People got mad. Democrats got so mad at him when he said his main goal was to make sure Barack Obama was a one-term president. But at the same time, he made a habit of making deals with Joe Biden when he was vice president, and everybody else in Washington had sort of bungled through an attempt to keep the government open, to avoid a big default on the debt. He and Biden would work together, pass these bills, do things in bipartisan manner, but every 2 years, more and more firebrands would come into his conference. And the changes that you would see is that you would trade out somebody like Rob Portman, who is this very, very much a man of Washington, Republican establishment. He retires in 2022. He gets replaced by J.D. Vance, who is now running around campaign rallies with Trump, angling to potentially be Trump's VP nominee. There have been so many trades like that, especially on the Republican side, that you now have a Republican conference that is, at least half of them don't want McConnell to be making any of these deals with Democrats.
So what do you think McConnell's legacy will be, given the totality of his career, if it's possible to sum it up?
He is the person, first and foremost, who blocked the appointment of a Supreme Court justice in Obama's final year in office when Justice Scalia died. He did it unilaterally right about this time 8 years ago and said no one's going to get that spot. He held the vacancy open and used it as a way to draw conservative Christian evangelicals to vote for Republican senators and also to Donald Trump, which led to 3 Supreme Court justices and a majority, probably a conservative majority on the court for years to come. That's his primary legacy, but he has a secondary legacy of somebody who, while breaking institutional norms quite often, tried to play the long game, as you mentioned his autobiography, a long game toward looking toward making government work a little bit, especially later in his career.
And finally, Paul, Trump took credit for torpedoing Tom Emmer's attempt to become Speaker. What role do you expect Trump to play with the leadership replacement jockeying to follow up McConnell? Sure.
Look, the congressional leadership elections are usually done on a very personal lawmaker-to-lawmaker basis. And when it comes to the Senate, the smaller club of only 100, and then you break it down even further by party. There's 49 Senate Republicans right now. These elections get played out in very personal ways. Usually the presidential nominee or the president of that party doesn't have a whole lot of sway. We have several aspirants to this job who are out there already making phone calls. Senator told a couple of us that, she's gotten calls already. But, the final block of people who are probably going to decide whether it's John Thune, John Cornyn, potentially John Barrasso, those are the three Republican names that get most often mentioned. The block that's going to decide who wins is that dozen to 15 or so Senate Republicans who are younger, who are newer here, who are more loyal to Trump. And that's probably where Trump plays his biggest role in possibly influencing those people, either to try and draw out some concessions from the potential successors or to throw their support behind someone. We'll see.
Paul Kane with The Washington Post, one of the best. Thank you, Paul.